What if I told you that somewhere in the shadows of forgotten scripture lies a book so precise, so eerily accurate in its predictions, that religious authorities have kept it hidden for over a millennium? Tonight, we descend into the depths of the Book of Jubilees, a text that doesn't just recount history, but reveals the mathematical precision of God's divine timeline. This isn't speculation. This isn't theory. This is the uncovering of humanity's chronological blueprint, written before empires rose and fell, before nations were born, before you and I drew breath. The year is 2025, and across our fractured world, events unfold with an almost choreographed precision. Wars rage where ancient prophecies declared they would. Nations align exactly as foretold. Economic systems crumble on schedule. But schedule according to what? According to whom? The answer lies buried in a book most Christians have never heard of, a book that chronicles not just what was Christians, but what must come to pass. Tonight, we unlock the Jubilees cosmic calendar and discover why everything happening around us was written in stone over 2 millennia ago. Prepare yourself for a journey that will challenge everything you thought you knew about biblical prophecy. For in the Book of Jubilees, we don't just read about God's plan, we witness the terrifying precision of its execution. The question isn't whether these prophecies are real. The question is, are you prepared for what comes next?
Before we start, I need your help. Subscribe to this channel so we can keep bringing these hidden truths to light.
In the 4th century, as the Roman Empire embraced Christianity, something extraordinary happened in the shadows of theological politics. Certain books that had been treasured, studied, and quoted by early church fathers began to disappear from official canons. Among these casualties was the Book of Jubilees, a text so detailed in its chronological framework that it made uncomfortable predictions about divine intervention in human affairs. But why would such a comprehensive biblical commentary be suppressed? What truths did it contain that proved too dangerous for mass consumption? The Book of Jubilees, also known as Little Genesis, claims to be the revelation given to Moses on Mount Sinai, not just the 10 Commandments, but a complete timeline of world history from creation to the end times. Unlike other biblical texts that speak in parables and symbols, Jubilees provide exact dates, precise cycles, and mathematical formulas for understanding God's intervention in human events. It reads less like religious poetry and more like a divine spreadsheet, calculating the exact moments when heaven would intersect with earth. For over 1,000 years, this book existed only in fragments and whispered references. Ethiopian Christians preserved it in their ancient language, treating it as sacred scripture, while the Western Church forgot its existence entirely. It wasn't until the 19th century that European scholars rediscovered complete manuscripts, hidden in Ethiopian monasteries like time capsules waiting for their prophetic moment. The question haunts us: was this preservation mere coincidence? Or was it part of the same divine plan the book itself describes? The rediscovery of Jubilees in our modern era isn't accidental. As we stand in 2025, watching global events unfold with an almost scripted precision, this ancient text emerges from obscurity with timing that feels orchestrated. The Ethiopian keepers of this manuscript understood something the Western Church had forgotten. Some truths are too profound for unprepared minds. They waited. They preserved. They knew that when humanity needed this roadmap most desperately, it would resurface. Consider the implications of this suppression and rediscovery. If the Book of Jubilees truly contains the chronological keys to understanding God's timeline, then its disappearance from mainstream Christianity represents one of history's greatest theological cover-ups. But its preservation in the hands of Ethiopian believers suggests that divine providence never intended for these truths to remain hidden forever. We are living in the generation chosen to receive this revelation. Open your Bible to Genesis, and you'll find the familiar story of creation unfolding in 7 days. But open the Book of Jubilees, and you'll discover that these days are merely the surface of a far more complex divine architecture. Jubilees reveals that creation itself operates on a cosmic calendar, a systematic framework, where every significant event in human history occurs according to predetermined celestial cycles. This isn't just religious symbolism. It's a mathematical model for understanding divine intervention. According to Jubilees, the creation week establishes a pattern that will govern all subsequent history. Each day of creation corresponds to a 1,000-year epoch in human development, but more importantly, each reflects a specific type of divine activity that repeats in predictable cycles. The text reveals that God didn't just create the world and step back. He embedded within creation itself a timing mechanism that would govern every major spiritual, political, and cosmic event until the end of time. The Book of Jubilees introduces us to concepts absent from canonical Genesis: the precise dating of patriarchal lives, the exact timing of covenantal moments, and the mathematical relationships between spiritual events and celestial phenomena. Where Genesis tells us that Abraham was called out of Ur, Jubilees provides the exact year, month, and day, not just as historical data, but as components of a larger chronological prophecy. These aren't random dates. They're coordinates in a divine GPS system guiding history toward its predetermined destination. Most remarkably, Jubilees presents creation not as a one-time event, but as an ongoing process operating through Jubilee cycles, 49-year periods that serve as the basic units of God's historical timeline. Every 49 years, according to this text, divine intervention reaches a crescendo, reshaping human civilization according to predetermined patterns. Wars begin and end. Empires rise and fall, and spiritual awakenings emerge, all synchronized to this cosmic metronome established at creation itself. As we examine these creation narratives in 2025, the implications become staggering. If Jubilees is correct, then the current global upheavals, political chaos, economic collapse, spiritual awakening, and international conflict aren't random occurrences, but precise fulfillments of patterns established before Adam drew breath. We're not witnessing the breakdown of civilization. We're observing the clockwork precision of divine prophecy executing exactly on schedule. Numbers in the Bible aren't arbitrary. They're not mere historical footnotes or poetic embellishments. In the Book of Jubilees, numbers become the language through which God communicates the architecture of time itself. Every date, every age, every chronological marker serves as a coordinate in a divine equation that spans from creation to the final judgment. Tonight, we decode this mathematical prophecy and discover why precise timing is the signature of authentic divine revelation. The Jubilee system operates on a foundation of 7-year cycles called weeks of years, with 7 such weeks creating a 49-year Jubilee period. But Jubilees reveals that this isn't merely an agricultural calendar, it's the fundamental rhythm by which God orchestrates human history. Abraham's calling, Isaac's birth, Jacob's transformation, Moses' law-giving, David's kingdom, and Christ's incarnation all occur at mathematically precise intervals within this system. Coincidence becomes impossible when examined through the lens of this chronological framework. Consider the mathematical precision. Jubilees calculates that from Adam's creation to the flood spans exactly 656 years, a number that corresponds to specific Jubilee cycles and aligns with astronomical phenomena known to ancient observers. From the flood to Abraham's calling measures exactly 892 years, again corresponding to predetermined Jubilee calculations. These aren't approximations or rounded figures. They're exact mathematical coordinates marking moments when heaven intersects with earthly history in measurable, predictable ways. The most unsettling aspect of Jubilee's mathematical framework is its predictive accuracy. When we apply its chronological system to recorded history, patterns emerge that defy statistical probability. The rise and fall of empires, the timing of major spiritual awakenings, the emergence of pivotal historical figures all align with Jubilee calculations made centuries before their occurrence. This isn't retroactive interpretation. It's mathematical proof that history operates according to divine equations established before time began. As we stand in 2025, these mathematical patterns point toward events unfolding with clockwork precision. The current global instability, the realignment of international powers, the emerging spiritual movements all occur exactly when Jubilee's calculations predict they should. We're not just witnessing history. We're observing the execution of a mathematical prophecy so precise that it proves divine authorship. The question isn't whether these calculations are accurate. It's whether we're prepared for what the mathematics reveal about our immediate future. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, names we've heard countless times in Sunday school lessons and sermon illustrations. But the book of Jubilees reveals these weren't just righteous men chosen at random by God. They were chronological anchors placed at mathematically precise intervals to serve as calibration points for the divine timeline itself. Each patriarch's birth, calling, death, and major life events correspond to exact Jubilee calculations, transforming familiar biblical narratives into a sophisticated prophetic chronometer that has been ticking since creation. The precision is breathtaking. Abraham's departure from Haran occurs in the 14th Jubilee after creation, not the 13th, not the 15th, but exactly the 14th, corresponding to a predetermined moment when divine intervention was scheduled to redirect human civilization. Isaac's birth happens precisely 25 years later, marking another crucial coordinate in God's temporal equation. Jacob's transformation into Israel occurs at another mathematically significant junction, demonstrating that even personal spiritual experiences follow the cosmic calendar established before time began. But here's where the narrative becomes truly unsettling. These patriarchal chronologies don't just record past events, they establish patterns for future divine interventions. The intervals between Abraham's calling, Isaac's near sacrifice, and Jacob's wrestling with God create mathematical ratios that repeat throughout subsequent history. When we examine the timing of Christ's birth, the destruction of Jerusalem, and major spiritual awakenings, we find identical mathematical relationships, suggesting that patriarchal history serves as a template for all future divine activity. Jubilees reveals that each patriarch received specific revelations about future Jubilee cycles, making them not just ancestors of faith, but prophetic witnesses to predetermined historical events. Abraham saw not only his immediate descendants, but specific future epochs when God would intervene in human affairs. Isaac understood the mathematical precision of divine timing. Jacob received visions of exact chronological sequences that would govern his descendants' history for millennia to come. As we analyze these patriarchal patterns in 2025, their prophetic implications become staggering. If the patriarchs serve as chronological anchors for divine intervention, then current global events should align with the same mathematical patterns established in their lives. The timing of modern Israel's restoration, the emergence of global spiritual movements, and the current international upheavals all correspond to Jubilee calculations rooted in patriarchal chronology. We're not just descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, we're living participants in the prophetic timeline they helped establish. Every covenant in Scripture, from Noah's rainbow to David's throne to the New Testament and Christ's blood, appears in the Bible as moments of divine grace breaking into human history. But Jubilees reveals a shocking truth. These covenants weren't spontaneous acts of divine mercy. They were predetermined appointments, scheduled at mathematically precise intervals according to the cosmic calendar established at creation. God doesn't make covenants randomly. He fulfills them exactly on time, according to chronological equations that prove his absolute sovereignty over history. The covenant with Noah occurs exactly 10 Jubilees after Adam's expulsion from Eden, not 9, not 11, but precisely 10, marking a complete cycle of divine judgment and restoration. Abraham's covenant follows a similar mathematical pattern, positioned at exact chronological coordinates that correspond to celestial events and historical necessities. The Mosaic covenant at Sinai happens at another predetermined junction, demonstrating that even the giving of the law follows the cosmic chronometer established before the foundations of the world. Most remarkably, Jubilees reveals that each covenant contains within itself the mathematical formula for the next covenant. The timing intervals between covenants create predictable patterns that allow us to calculate when future divine interventions will occur. This isn't theological speculation, it's mathematical prophecy embedded within the covenant structure itself. Each agreement between God and humanity serves simultaneously as fulfillment of previous predictions and foundation for future prophetic calculations. The chronological precision of covenant making extends beyond major biblical events to include their fulfillments and renewals throughout history. The destruction of Solomon's temple, the Babylonian exile, the return under Ezra, and the coming of Christ all occur at mathematically predictable intervals based on original covenant chronologies. Even the dispersion and regathering of Israel follow mathematical patterns established in ancient covenant ceremonies, proving that God's promises operate according to precise temporal equations. In our current historical moment of 2025, these covenant chronologies point toward the culmination of the entire biblical timeline. If previous covenants followed mathematical precision in their timing, then the final covenant, the establishment of God's kingdom on earth, should occur according to the same chronological patterns. Current global events, the restoration of Israel, the emergence of worldwide spiritual awakening, and the collapse of human governmental systems all align with covenant mathematics, pointing toward an imminent, predetermined divine intervention that will surpass all previous covenant fulfillments. History textbooks teach us that civilizations rise and fall due to economic factors, military conflicts, or social upheavals, but the Book of Jubilees reveals a more terrifying truth. Every major judgment upon nations, every collapse of empires, every moment of divine wrath throughout history occurs according to predetermined Jubilee cycles. God doesn't judge civilizations reactively. He schedules their judgment from the moment of their birth, executing divine justice with mathematical precision that proves his absolute control over the rise and fall of human powers. The pattern emerges with stark clarity when we examine biblical judgments through Jubilee chronology. The flood comes exactly 656 years after creation, a number that corresponds to specific Jubilee calculations and marks a predetermined moment when divine patience reaches its scheduled conclusion. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah occurs at another mathematically significant junction, demonstrating that even localized judgments follow the cosmic timeline established before these cities were founded. But the most unsettling aspect of Jubilees' judgment chronology is its predictive accuracy for non-biblical events. The rise and fall of Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome all align with Jubilee calculations made centuries before these empires emerged. The timing of major plagues, natural disasters, and civilizational collapses throughout history correspond to mathematical patterns established in Jubilee chronology, suggesting that God's judgment operates according to precise temporal equations that govern all human civilization. Jubilees reveals that divine judgment operates in cycles of increasing intensity, with each Jubilee period bringing more comprehensive divine intervention than the previous cycle. This isn't gradual escalation, it's mathematical progression, with each judgment period calculated to prepare humanity for increasingly direct divine involvement in earthly affairs. The intervals between major judgments create predictable patterns that allow us to anticipate when divine wrath will next intersect with human history. As we examine our current historical moment through this lens of cyclical judgment, the implications become profoundly sobering. The year 2025 falls at a mathematically significant junction in Jubilee calculations, a moment when previous patterns suggest major divine judgment should manifest on a global scale. Current international conflicts, economic instability, natural disasters, and social upheavals all align with the timing patterns established for previous divine judgments. We may not be witnessing random historical chaos. We may be observing the precise execution of divine justice scheduled from before the foundation of the world. When Solomon built the first temple, most believed they were witnessing the construction of a magnificent house of worship. But the Book of Jubilees reveals a more profound truth. The temple wasn't just built in Jerusalem. It was built at a precise chronological coordinate that had been calculated since creation. Every measurement, every ritual, every sacred appointment in temple worship operates according to the same Jubilee mathematics that govern all divine intervention in human history. The temple wasn't just God's earthly dwelling, it was his chronological headquarters. The timing of the temple's construction aligns perfectly with Jubilee calculations that can be traced back to Adam's expulsion from Eden. Solomon begins building in the 480th year after Israel's exodus from Egypt, a number that corresponds exactly to predetermined Jubilee cycles and marks a moment when heaven and earth were scheduled to intersect with unprecedented intimacy. Every stone placed, every golden vessel crafted, every priestly garment sewn follows the same mathematical precision that governs cosmic events and prophetic fulfillment. But here's where the narrative becomes truly extraordinary. The temple's physical dimensions mirror the mathematical proportions of Jubilee chronology itself. The Holy of Holies measures exactly 20 cubits by 20 cubits by 20 cubits proportions that correspond to specific Jubilee calculations and create a three-dimensional representation of divine timing. The temple wasn't just built according to God's architectural specifications. It was constructed as a physical manifestation of the chronological equations governing all history. The most unsettling aspect of temple chronology is its predictive accuracy regarding the temple's own destruction and restoration. Jubilees reveals that the timing of the temple's destruction by Babylon, the construction of the Second Temple, and its destruction by Rome all follow the same mathematical patterns established in Solomon's original construction. Even the temple's absence becomes part of the chronological equation, with specific Jubilee calculations governing the duration of its desolation. The pattern emerges with stark clarity when we examine biblical judgments through Jubilee chronology. The flood comes exactly 656 years after creation, a number that corresponds to specific Jubilee calculations and marks a predetermined moment when divine patience reaches its scheduled conclusion. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah occurs at another mathematically significant junction, demonstrating that even localized judgments follow the cosmic timeline established before these cities were founded. But the most unsettling aspect of Jubilee's judgment chronology is its predictive accuracy for non-biblical events. The rise and fall of Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome all align with Jubilee calculations made centuries before these empires emerged. The timing of major plagues, natural disasters, and civilizational collapses throughout history correspond to mathematical patterns established in Jubilee chronology, suggesting that God's judgment operates according to precise temporal equations that govern all human civilization. Jubilees reveals that divine judgment operates in cycles of increasing intensity, with each Jubilee period bringing more comprehensive divine intervention than the previous cycle. This isn't gradual escalation, it's mathematical progression, with each judgment period calculated to prepare humanity for increasingly direct divine involvement in earthly affairs. The intervals between major judgments create predictable patterns that allow us to anticipate when divine wrath will next intersect with human history. As we examine our current historical moment through this lens of cyclical judgment, the implications become profoundly sobering. The year 2025 falls at a mathematically significant junction in Jubilee calculations, a moment when previous patterns suggest major divine judgment should manifest on a global scale. Current international conflicts, economic instability, natural disasters, and social upheavals all align with the timing patterns established for previous divine judgments. We may not be witnessing random historical chaos. We may be observing the precise execution of divine justice scheduled from before the foundation of the world. When Solomon built the first temple, most believed they were witnessing the construction of a magnificent house of worship. But the Book of Jubilees reveals a more profound truth. The temple wasn't just built in Jerusalem, it was built at a precise chronological coordinate that had been calculated since creation. Every measurement, every ritual, every sacred appointment in temple worship operates according to the same Jubilee mathematics that govern all divine intervention in human history. The temple wasn't just God's earthly dwelling. It was his chronological headquarters. The timing of the temple's construction aligns perfectly with Jubilee calculations that can be traced back to Adam's expulsion from Eden. Solomon begins building in the 480th year after Israel's exodus from Egypt, a number that corresponds exactly to predetermined Jubilee cycles, and marks a moment when heaven and earth were scheduled to intersect with unprecedented intimacy. Every stone placed, every golden vessel crafted, every priestly garment sewn follows the same mathematical precision that governs cosmic events and prophetic fulfillment. But here's where the narrative becomes truly extraordinary. The temple's physical dimensions mirror the mathematical proportions of Jubilee chronology itself. The Holy of Holies measures exactly 20 cubits by 20 cubits by 20 cubits proportions that correspond to specific Jubilee calculations and create a three-dimensional representation of divine timing. The temple wasn't just built according to God's architectural specifications, it was constructed as a physical manifestation of the chronological equations governing all history. The most unsettling aspect of temple chronology is its predictive accuracy regarding the temple's own destruction and restoration. Jubilees reveals that the timing of the temple's destruction by Babylon, the construction of the Second Temple, and its destruction by Rome all follow the same mathematical patterns established in Solomon's original construction. Even the temple's absence becomes part of the chronological equation, with specific Jubilee calculations governing the duration of its desolation. As we examine temple chronology from our vantage point in 2025, the implications become staggering. If the temple's construction and destruction follow predetermined mathematical patterns, then current discussions about temple reconstruction aren't just religious speculation, they're chronological inevitabilities. The mathematical patterns established in Solomon's temple point toward a specific moment when divine intervention will restore God's earthly dwelling according to the same Jubilee precision that governed its original construction. We may be approaching that predetermined moment. Daniel saw visions of beasts and kingdoms. Ezekiel witnessed wheels within wheels. Isaiah prophesied of suffering servants and restored Zion. But the Book of Jubilees reveals that beneath every prophetic vision lies a mathematical foundation so precise that it transforms biblical prophecy from spiritual poetry into divine mathematics. The prophets weren't just receiving visions of future events, they were downloading chronological equations that prove the predetermined nature of all human history. The mathematical precision is breathtaking. Daniel's prophecy of 70 weeks corresponds exactly to Jubilee calculations that span from the decree to rebuild Jerusalem to the coming of Messiah. But Jubilees reveals that this isn't just one isolated prophecy, it's part of a comprehensive mathematical system where every prophetic timeline interlocks with every other prophetic calculation. Isaiah's prophecies, Jeremiah's chronologies, and Ezekiel's temple measurements all operate according to the same Jubilee mathematics, creating a unified equation that encompasses all biblical prophecy. Most remarkably, Jubilees demonstrates that prophetic mathematics operates on multiple levels simultaneously. Surface readings provide historical fulfillments, but deeper mathematical analysis reveals future applications of the same chronological patterns. The same equations that predicted Christ's first coming continue calculating toward his second advent. The same mathematical relationships that governed ancient Israel's restoration from Babylon now point toward end times restoration of global divine government. The prophets themselves understood this mathematical precision. When Jeremiah calculated 70 years of captivity, he wasn't making an educated guess, he was applying Jubilee mathematics to determine exactly when divine intervention would restore Israel. When Daniel calculated prophetic timelines extending thousands of years into the future, he was using the same chronological equations that Moses received on Sinai. Every true prophet operated as a divine mathematician, translating eternal equations into temporal predictions. In 2025, these prophetic mathematics converge toward calculations that span millennia. Current global events, political upheavals, economic collapse, natural disasters, and spiritual awakenings all occur at moments predicted by ancient prophetic mathematics. We're not witnessing random historical chaos. We're observing the precise execution of mathematical prophecies calculated before the prophets themselves were born. The equations are completing themselves with clockwork precision, pointing toward imminent fulfillments that will surpass all previous prophetic manifestations. Christmas sermons tell us that Jesus came in the fullness of time, suggesting divine timing without explaining its mathematical precision. But the Book of Jubilees reveals the shocking truth. Christ's birth, ministry, death, and resurrection all occur at exactly predetermined chronological coordinates that can be calculated from creation itself. The Messiah's advent wasn't divinely spontaneous, it was chronologically inevitable, executed according to Jubilee mathematics established before Adam drew breath. The precision is staggering. Christ's birth occurs exactly 500 years after Adam's creation, according to Jubilee calculations, not 499 years, not 501 years, but precisely 500 years, marking a mathematically significant junction when divine intervention was scheduled to reach its historical climax. His ministry begins at another predetermined coordinate, lasting exactly 3.5 years, according to prophetic mathematics that can be traced through multiple Old Testament chronologies. His crucifixion occurs at Passover not just for symbolic reasons, but because Jubilee calculations demanded that divine redemption happen at that exact chronological moment. But here's where the narrative becomes truly profound. Christ's chronological precision establishes the mathematical foundation for calculating his second advent. If his first coming followed predetermined Jubilee mathematics with perfect accuracy, then his return must follow the same chronological equations. The intervals between his birth, ministry, death, resurrection, and ascension create mathematical ratios that extend into future calculations, providing chronological coordinates for his return that can be calculated through the same Jubilee system that predicted his first advent. Most remarkably, Jubilees reveals that Christ's earthly ministry itself operated according to mathematical precision. His calling of disciples, major miracles, prophetic pronouncements, and confrontations with religious authorities all occur at chronologically significant moments that correspond to deeper Jubilee calculations. Even his parables contain mathematical elements that align with chronological patterns, suggesting that every aspect of his earthly mission followed the same cosmic timing that governed his birth and death. As we analyze Messianic chronology from our position in 2025, the mathematical patterns point toward calculations that span from his first advent to his imminent return. Current global conditions, the restoration of Israel, worldwide spiritual awakening, international upheaval, and emerging global governance all align with chronological patterns that began with Christ's first coming and continue calculating toward his second advent. We may be living in the final coordinates of the mathematical prophecy that began with his birth in Bethlehem. The book of Revelation speaks of 7 seals, 7 trumpets, 7 bowls of wrath symbols that most interpret as spiritual metaphors for end times chaos. But the book of Jubilees reveals these aren't symbolic representations. They're mathematical coordinates in the final equation of human history. Every apocalyptic vision, every end times judgment, every millennial calculation operates according to the same Jubilee chronology that has governed divine intervention since creation. The apocalypse isn't spiritual poetry. It's the culmination of a mathematical prophecy that has been calculating toward this moment for millennia. The precision is terrifying. The 7-year tribulation period corresponds exactly to 1 week in the Jubilee system, marking a predetermined moment when divine judgment will reach its mathematical climax. The 260 days of the beast's authority, the 42 months of gentile dominance, the 3.5 years of prophetic witness all represent different expressions of the same chronological equation that can be traced through every major divine intervention in biblical history. These aren't approximate time frames. They're exact mathematical coordinates marking moments when heaven will intersect with earth in unprecedented ways. Most remarkably, Jubilees reveals that apocalyptic chronology operates on multiple levels simultaneously. The 7-year tribulation represents both a literal 7-year period and the culmination of 7 millennia of human history since creation. The millennial kingdom represents both a 1,000-year reign and the completion of cosmic Jubilee cycles that began with Adam's fall. Every apocalyptic timeline interlocks with every other end times calculation, creating a unified mathematical system that encompasses all eschatological prophecy. The mathematical patterns extend beyond biblical prophecy to encompass current global events with unsettling accuracy. International conflicts, economic collapse, natural disasters, and spiritual awakenings all occur at moments that correspond to apocalyptic calculations rooted in Jubilee chronology. The timing of modern Israel's restoration, the emergence of global governance systems, and the current worldwide spiritual crisis all align with mathematical patterns that point toward imminent apocalyptic fulfillments. As we examine apocalyptic mathematics from our vantage point in 2025, the calculations converge toward coordinates that suggest we're approaching the final equations of human history. Current global conditions don't just resemble biblical end times descriptions. They fulfill mathematical prophecies that have been calculating toward this moment since creation. We may not be approaching the apocalypse. We may be living within its predetermined chronological boundaries, witnessing the precise execution of equations established before time began. Modern geopolitics appears chaotic, nations rising, alliances shifting, borders changing according to economic pressures and military conflicts. But the Book of Jubilees reveals a shocking truth. Every major nation throughout history has operated according to predetermined chronological boundaries established before their foundation. Countries don't rise to power accidentally. They emerge at mathematically calculated moments to fulfill specific roles in the divine timeline. The rise and fall of nations isn't political coincidence. It's prophetic mathematics executing with clockwork precision. The pattern emerges with startling clarity when we examine major empires through Jubilee chronology. Babylon rises exactly when calculations predict it should dominate the ancient world. Persia emerges at the predetermined moment when divine intervention requires a different type of imperial power. Greece conquers according to mathematical coordinates established centuries before Alexander's birth. Rome dominates precisely when Jubilee equations demand a global empire that will prepare the world for Messiah's advent. But the most unsettling aspect of national chronology is its accuracy regarding modern nations that didn't exist when Jubilees was written. The emergence of the United States occurs at a mathematically significant junction that corresponds to calculations about end times global leadership. The restoration of Israel happens exactly when ancient chronologies predict it should return to prominence. The rise of China, Russia, and other contemporary powers all align with Jubilee patterns that suggest their current roles were calculated millennia ago. Jubilees reveals that national chronology operates through what we might call prophetic assignments, specific roles that nations are predetermined to fulfill at calculated moments in the divine timeline. Some nations exist to preserve divine truth, others to execute divine judgment, still others to prepare conditions for prophetic fulfillments. Each nation's political structure, geographic boundaries, and historical duration correspond to the mathematical requirements of their prophetic assignment. In 2025, these national calculations point toward a convergence that suggests we're approaching the climax of international prophetic fulfillment. Current global alliances, emerging conflicts, economic interdependencies, and political upheavals all occur at moments predicted by ancient national chronologies. The timing of international crises, the formation of global governance systems, and the realignment of world powers all follow mathematical patterns that point toward imminent completion of the prophetic schedule that has governed national rise and fall since civilization began. Every calculation has a conclusion. Every equation reaches its solution. Every chronological system approaches its predetermined destination. The Book of Jubilees reveals that all the mathematical patterns we've explored, patriarchal chronologies, covenant timelines, prophetic calculations, and national schedules converge toward a single moment when divine intervention will surpass all previous manifestations. We're not just studying ancient chronology. We're examining the mathematical countdown to the climax of human history itself. The convergence is mathematically inevitable. 7 millennia of human history since creation approached their calculated conclusion. 70 Jubilee cycles since Adam's fall near their predetermined completion. The mathematical relationships between all biblical chronologies point toward the same chronological coordinates, suggesting that multiple prophetic timelines will simultaneously reach their fulfillment. This isn't gradual prophetic development. It's mathematical convergence toward a moment when all divine equations complete themselves simultaneously. Most remarkably, this convergence appears to be happening in our lifetime. The year 2025 falls within chronological boundaries that multiple Jubilee calculations identify as mathematically significant. Current global conditions, international upheaval, economic instability, spiritual awakening, and technological advancement all align with the timing patterns established for end times convergence. We may not be witnessing random historical events. We may be observing the final calculations of prophetic mathematics established before the world began. The implications are staggering. If Jubilee chronology accurately predicted every major divine intervention throughout history, then its calculations about imminent convergence deserve serious attention. Current global events don't just resemble biblical end times descriptions. They fulfill mathematical prophecies that have been calculating toward this moment for millennia. Political chaos, economic collapse, natural disasters, and spiritual movements all occur at moments that correspond to the final equations of divine chronology. As we stand at this potential convergence point, the mathematical patterns suggest that human history is approaching its calculated destination. The same chronological precision that governed creation, covenants, judgments, and prophetic fulfillments now points toward imminent divine intervention that will surpass all previous manifestations. We may be living in the final coordinates of the cosmic equation that began with Adam's creation and culminates in the establishment of divine government on Earth. Throughout history, when civilizations collapsed and divine truth seemed extinguished, a remnant remained. Not by accident, not by human determination, but according to mathematical precision embedded within Jubilee chronology itself. The Book of Jubilees reveals that God doesn't just preserve a faithful remnant randomly. He calculates their existence, positions them strategically, and uses them to execute specific chronological assignments that keep the divine timeline operating with perfect precision. The remnant isn't just spiritually significant, they're chronologically essential. The pattern emerges across every major epoch. When the flood destroys ancient civilization, Noah's family represents exactly the mathematical minimum required to restart divine chronology. When Abraham's descendants multiply in Egypt, the remnant who remember covenant promises corresponds to calculations needed for Exodus timing. When Israel faces exile, the remnant who maintain prophetic understanding aligns with mathematical requirements for restoration chronology. Each remnant appears at precisely calculated moments to fulfill specific temporal assignments. But here's where the narrative becomes personally profound. The remnant's role isn't passive preservation, it's active participation in divine calculations. Those who understand Jubilee chronology don't just witness prophetic fulfillment, they participate in its execution. Prayer, worship, spiritual warfare, and prophetic intercession all occur at mathematically significant moments that influence the timing of divine intervention. The remnant doesn't just preserve truth, they serve as chronological catalysts who trigger predetermined divine responses at calculated moments. Most remarkably, Jubilees reveals that remnant communities throughout history have possessed fragments of the complete chronological understanding, with each generation contributing to the mathematical equations that govern their historical moment. Ethiopian Christians preserve the Book of Jubilees itself. Jewish communities maintained precise calendar calculations. Christian mystics protected prophetic timelines. Each remnant group serves as guardians of specific chronological knowledge required for end times convergence. In 2025, these historical patterns suggest that a final remnant is emerging with unprecedented understanding of Jubilee chronology. Current spiritual awakenings, prophetic movements, and biblical research all point toward the convergence of chronological knowledge that has been scattered across centuries. We may not just be studying ancient texts, we may be the generation chosen to receive complete understanding of divine timing, precisely when that understanding becomes essential for humanity's final transition. There shall be signs in the sun, moon, and stars, Christ declared, speaking of end times indicators that would herald his return. But the Book of Jubilees reveals these aren't random cosmic anomalies, they're celestial confirmations of earthly calculations that have been operating since creation. Every major astronomical event, every solar eclipse, every blood moon, every planetary alignment occurs at moments that correspond to Jubilee chronology, proving that heaven and earth operate according to the same divine mathematics established before time began. The precision is breathtaking. Major biblical events consistently align with significant astronomical phenomena. Christ's birth corresponds to unprecedented stellar configurations. His crucifixion occurs during calculated solar eclipse timing. His resurrection aligns with specific lunar coordinates. But Jubilees reveals this pattern extends throughout all history. Every major divine intervention coincides with celestial events that confirm the mathematical accuracy of earthly chronological calculations. Modern astronomy has confirmed patterns that ancient chronologists somehow understood without telescopes or computer calculations. The timing of solar eclipses, blood moon sequences, and planetary alignments all follow mathematical patterns that correspond to Jubilee chronology with stunning accuracy. Recent astronomical events, the 2017 total solar eclipse across America, the 2014-2015 blood moon tetrad over Israel. Current planetary alignments all occur at moments that align with ancient calculations about end times convergence. Most remarkably, These celestial confirmations appear to be accelerating as we approach chronological convergence. Astronomical events that historically occurred at intervals of decades or centuries now happen with increasing frequency, suggesting that heavenly signs are intensifying precisely when earthly calculations indicate approaching divine intervention. The mathematical relationship between celestial timing and terrestrial chronology proves that the same divine intelligence governs both cosmic mechanics and human history. As we observe current astronomical phenomena from our position in 2025, the celestial confirmations align with earthly calculations in ways that suggest imminent chronological climax. Recent solar eclipses, approaching celestial events, and emerging astronomical patterns all correspond to the mathematical coordinates identified by Jubilee chronology for end times convergence. We may not be witnessing random cosmic phenomena. We may be observing heaven's confirmation that earthly calculations are approaching their predetermined conclusion. Every equation seeks resolution. Every calculation demands completion. Every chronological system approaches its ultimate destination. Tonight, we've journeyed through the Book of Jubilees and discovered that human history isn't random chaos punctuated by occasional divine interventions. It's the systematic execution of a mathematical prophecy so comprehensive, so precise, that it encompasses every moment from creation to final judgment. The cosmic equation that began with Adam's first breath is approaching its predetermined conclusion, and we may be the generation chosen to witness its completion. The mathematical evidence is overwhelming. Patriarchal chronologies, covenant timelines, prophetic calculations, national schedules, apocalyptic equations, and celestial confirmations all point toward the same chronological coordinates. Multiple independent calculations converge toward identical conclusions about divine timing, creating mathematical proof that surpasses statistical possibility. We're not interpreting ancient religious texts. We're decoding the operational manual for reality itself. But understanding these calculations carries profound responsibility. If we truly comprehend the mathematical precision of divine timing, if we genuinely recognize our position within predetermined chronological boundaries, if we honestly acknowledge the approaching convergence of prophetic equations, then our response cannot be passive observation. Knowledge of divine timing becomes invitation to active participation in the cosmic equation itself. We're not just students of prophecy. We're participants in its fulfillment. The silence that follows this revelation isn't emptiness. It's the profound quiet that precedes divine thunder. When Moses received the law on Sinai, when Elijah heard the still small voice, when John received apocalyptic visions on Patmos, the initial response was always overwhelming silence. Mathematical proof of divine sovereignty, chronological evidence of predetermined destiny, prophetic understanding of approaching convergence, these truths demand contemplation that transcends intellectual analysis and approaches worship itself. As we conclude this exploration of Jubilee's chronological mysteries, we're left with questions that statistics cannot answer and calculations cannot resolve. If these mathematical patterns prove divine authorship of history, how will we respond to our predetermined role in the cosmic equation? If we're truly approaching chronological convergence, are we prepared for divine intervention that will surpass all previous manifestations? The Book of Jubilees doesn't just reveal humanity's past, it unveils our imminent future. The question isn't whether these calculations are accurate. The question is whether we're ready for what they predict. The Book of Jubilees ends, but the chronological system it reveals continues calculating. Every day brings us closer to the mathematical convergence that ancient chronologists predicted with stunning precision. Every global event aligns more perfectly with prophetic coordinates established before civilization began. Every astronomical phenomenon confirms earthly calculations with increasing accuracy. The cosmic equation doesn't pause for human understanding. It executes relentlessly toward its predetermined conclusion. Tonight, you've glimpsed the mathematical foundation underlying all human history. You've witnessed the chronological precision that governs divine intervention. You've discovered that current global events aren't random chaos, but calculated fulfillments of ancient prophecies. The question isn't whether these patterns will continue, the mathematics guarantee their completion. The question is how this knowledge will transform your understanding of the present moment and your preparation for what approaches. The calculation continues, the convergence approaches, the equation nears completion. And somewhere in the silence between heartbeats, between thoughts, between moments of ordinary time, eternity prepares to intersect with history once again, not randomly, not spontaneously, but exactly on schedule, according to mathematical prophecies established before the stars were named. Are you ready for what the numbers reveal?